As you came into the industry, what were some of the things, I'm going to make you think back to before you knew everything that you know about nuclear insurance. What were some of the things that you had to figure out early on that were just so different than other industries?
The level of regulation from a federal perspective was, something that is, a far more significant than, say, the potato industry or any other, those types of commercial industries, of course. And so, and the whole idea of government requiring nuclear operators to insure nuclear liability, that's very unique.
Tell me about that. What does the government make the nuclear
right.
operators do?
So
what is nuclear liability?
Okay, nuclear liability is a very interesting field, if you like that sort of thing.
Our audience is nerds. They like that sort of thing.
Excellent. So you have to step back a little bit. Back in the early 60s, when nuclear power started to become commercialized, they had seen what had happened during the Second World War and the catastrophic results that could happen if nuclear went bad. And they came up with the Paris Convention and Vienna Convention shortly thereafter. And these conventions outlined, basically it drew a box around the exposure so that insurers could get their heads around nuclear liability. Otherwise, the insurance industry said, sorry, go away. But government said, no, we need to harness this. We need to use it for commercial purposes. And so the insurer said, okay, well, if you do this, this, and this, and this, then we can start looking at this. And that's what basically the principles in the Paris Convention and also in the new revised Paris Convention about absolute and exclusive liability to the operator, a limitation in time and amount, these various principles.
Can you walk us through each one of those principles in a little bit further depth?
I'm not sure if I can get all. I might not remember all of them. Exclusive and absolute liability.
So what does that mean, and how does it differ than other industries?
Well, in other industries, you have to, a chair manufacturer. So if your chair collapsed and you sued that chair manufacturer, you would have to prove that under tort, and you'd have to prove that chair manufacturer actually caused that chair to collapse. So you have to prove that they were liable. Where in nuclear liability, because of the channeling, it's automatically the operator is responsible.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Right.
If a nuclear incident happens, guess what? You pay.
Yep.
You're responsible. So it puts a huge amount of responsibility and accountability on that operator.
Yeah.
So he's not going to let any willy-nilly guy come onto his site. He's going to have vendor qualification and make sure that who's ever coming onto his site is absolutely trained appropriately and absolutely working to the very, very best. And that's why it's all top quartile companies that are going to be working in nuclear power stations, because if you were 100% liable no matter what happened, and then when somebody else is driving your car, you would make sure that person...
Right, it would change behavior.
It would absolutely change the behavior, that's right. And that's what happens with nuclear power stations. With they're absolutely and exclusively liable for nuclear liability, they are making sure that everybody that comes onto their site, everything that they do on that site, it's so, the safety culture is so critical.
And this was set according to an international convention?
Absolutely.
So that means, is that the same in every country? This liability regime looks roughly the same?
Yes. I can't say 100% of the countries around the world, but, for the most part, if a country is going into the nuclear space, they look to these principles that have been established, and that's basically the only way the insurers are prepared to pick up this exposure. So that
was one of the aspects.
Yeah,
what was it? Another
well, there's another one in limitation in time and amount. So under the old Paris Convention, the limitation of liability was 10 years. So if there was an incident, anyone who wanted to bring a claim against that operator had to do it within 10 years of that incident. Under the revised Paris, which may come into play very soon, within the next year or so, that is going from a 10-year tail to what we call a 30-year tail. So,
why was it revised in that direction?
Well, basically because if there is a latent injury
Yeah.
from nuclear,
Yeah.
such as cancer,
Yeah.
it could take more than 10 years for that to develop.
But doesn't that, and maybe we're getting a little too into health physics here, but doesn't that also open it up to the longer period of time that you wait? That cancer could have come from something else too.
Thank you. That's precisely what the insurers say. I mean, you look at cancer statistics today, and 1 in 3 people are going to have cancer sometime in their life. So you tell me, did that cancer come from that nuclear incident, or did it come from genetics? Did it come from other exposures? You won't be able to tell.
Right. I think this is where, Greenpeace, which is supposed to be this environmental organization, promotes all of these lies about the death count from Chernobyl. And I think where they originally drew that data was they just took the total number of cancers in a given region and then attributed it to that accident without actually comparing it to a control group, and found out that the amount of cancers actually wasn't that extreme of an increase as they said.
Yeah, there's a technical thing that, and I don't know what it is. It's something about non-linear.
Linear no threshold
That's
theory?
it.
Is that,
yes,
okay,
that's the
there's one of those.
Oh,
yeah.
you did know about that.
Wow, this comes up a lot.
Yeah, well, that, and my old engineer, he used to say, he says, it's like saying, if you take, I think, how did he put it? If you take one aspirin versus a whole bottle of aspirin. Well, not everybody's going to take a whole bottle of aspirin.
Right.
I can't remember how. So scratch that out of the ear.
Yeah, no, I think I know what you're talking about. We're going to leave this in, and I think the analogy was like a whole bottle of aspirin has a 100% chance of killing you, but one pill of aspirin doesn't have a 1% chance of killing you.
Yes.
But that is how
the non-linear threshold works, or something.
And that's
like
actually
that.
so now this makes it complicated because although that's ridiculous, it is still on the books for many health standards agencies. So what do you do about that from an insurance perspective?
From an insurance perspective, we've only insurers have to have a box again, so that box is the 10 years is really, really stretching an insurer's capability of understanding what's going on and ability to respond. Going out to 30 years, some jurisdictions are dealing with it in different ways. Here in Canada, because Canada was the first jurisdiction to insure to go to the higher limits and the broader heads of damages that are introduced under the revised Paris Convention, there's an indemnity agreement that the government has directly with the operators for that 10 to 30 year tail. So the insurers are still prepared to take that first 10-year tail. It's the remaining tail we're still uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
So that's what the state of it is here in Canada, and that's the solution that we've come up with.
So who's going to take? So the state would then take that. Isn't that then just the payouts coming from taxpayer dollars?
Well, if there is a payout.
Right, if there's a payout.
Yeah.
So because you still have to prove somehow that
They
you're
have to
damaged.
prove. They have to prove causality. Like there's. They don't have to prove negligence, like you would do with the chair manufacturer, but they do have to prove causality. So that victim would have to prove that yes, I was in the zone when the incident occurred, and yes, I was irradiated, and yes, this cancer is a direct result of that. So there's a lot of things to still prove. And that's why in the event of a nuclear incident, there's so much care taken in registering everyone that's in the zone, that's coming out of the zone, in emergency planning and emergency measures, and all of those things are very, very cognizant of these issues, and they take that into consideration when they develop those.
There was another aspect you mentioned too, and that was a cap of some sort.
Okay.
Tell me about that.
The cap was... that's the time cap with respect to time, but limit.
So dollar cap.
Dollar
as well.
cap.
Yeah.
So again, insurers, if you cannot quantify a risk, you cannot insure it. We know how much your car costs to replace. We know how much your house costs to replace. So an insurer can say, okay, I'm going to lose $100,000 or I'm going to lose $500,000. It doesn't matter. As long as we know the number, then they can work it back and figure out how much premium they're going to need to insure
to cover that. Yeah.
So that's the way it works. So if it's unlimited liability, it's like, I don't know, how am I can't get my head around that.
Yeah.
So Under the old Nuclear Liability Act, the limit was 75 million, which was enacted back in 1976. So long time ago.
75 million per person, per incident?
No, per site.
Oh,
so
per
it was
site,
a site.
okay,
It was
yeah.
a site limit.
Yeah.
So, for instance,
That sounds
Pickering,
reasonable. I like
well,
that.
Pickering has 8. Although it had 8 reactors, it's still all one site.
Yeah.
And so there would be one limit that would be applicable to that, to an incident that would occur perhaps at Pickering. Now, and 2 years ago, 2017. Wow, time flies so fast. The limit went to 650. Last year it was 750. This year it's 850
850
million.
850 million.
That's right. And next year it'll be $1 billion. 2020, the limit will go to a $1 billion limit.
And I think the U.S. under
Canada.
the Price-Anderson Act or something is pretty high also.
It's, I think, 375 million or something
Okay.
that's insured. And then they have what they call their retrospective process and program, which would pull a certain number of millions of dollars from each reactor site in the U.S. Over a 10-year period, and that takes it to like a $12 billion limit or something
see.
like that.